The rope burns on her wrist still bled when Julianna Owens stumbled into Deer Lodge, Montana on a scorching afternoon in July of 1878, her dress torn and her dark hair matted with dust from 3 days of walking through country that showed no mercy to those who traveled it alone. She had been a captive of Mexican bandits for 8 months, traded twice like livestock, until an Apache war party raided the bandit camp near the New Mexico border and freed her along with 2 other captives who had not survived the journey north. The Apache had given her water, pointed her toward the mountains, and left her to find her own way to civilization, which was more kindness than she had known in nearly a year. Now she stood at the edge of this rough mining town with nothing but the clothes on her back and a hollow feeling in her chest where hope used to live. The main street stretched before her like a gauntlet, lined with false-fronted buildings that seemed to lean toward each other as if sharing secrets. Men stopped their conversations to stare as she passed, and women pulled their children closer, their eyes full of questions and judgment. Julianna kept her gaze straight ahead, her spine rigid despite the exhaustion that made her bones feel like they were made of sand. She had learned in captivity that showing weakness only invited worse treatment, and that lesson had been beaten into her so thoroughly that she could not shake it even now that she was free. She made it to the general store before her legs finally gave out, catching herself against the wooden post that held up the awning. The world tilted sideways, and she closed her eyes, trying to remember how to breathe properly. When she opened them again, a man was crouching in front of her, his face shadowed by the brim of a dusty hat. His eyes were the color of creek water in spring, clear and surprisingly gentle for someone who looked like he had spent his whole life working under an unforgiving sun. "Madam, you need some help," he said, and it was not a question but a statement of fact delivered in a voice that had a rough edge to it, like rope that had been left out in the weather too long. "I need nothing from you," Julianna heard herself say, though even she could hear how hollow the words sounded. Pride was a poor meal, but it was all she had left. The man did not move away. Instead, he studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she refused to give him that satisfaction. "You are bleeding," he said finally, gesturing to her wrists, "and unless I miss my guess, you have not eaten in days. Now, I am going to stand up and walk into that store, and I am going to buy some supplies. You can follow me in there and let me help you, or you can stay out here and fall over in the street. Your choice." He stood and did exactly what he said he would do, disappearing into the dim interior of the store without looking back. Julianna remained where she was for a long moment, her pride warring with the desperate need that clawed at her insides. The pride lost. She pushed herself upright and followed him inside. The store smelled like leather and coffee, and something sweet that made her stomach clench with hunger. The man was already talking to the shopkeeper, a portly fellow with suspicious eyes that kept darting toward Julianna. She stood just inside the doorway, ready to bolt if she needed to, every muscle in her body tense. "I will need bandages," the man was saying, "and some salve for wounds. Bread, cheese, dried beef. A canteen of water." He paused, then added, "And a dress, if you have got one that might fit a woman of about 5.5 feet tall." "I cannot pay you," Julianna said, her voice cutting through the transaction like a knife. "I have nothing." The man turned to look at her, and there was something in his expression that she could not quite read. "Did I ask you to pay me?" "Everyone wants something," she said flatly. "So you might as well tell me what your price is now, before I eat your food and owe you more than I can afford to give." The shopkeeper made a disgusted sound in his throat, but the man held up one hand to silence him. He walked over to where Julianna stood, stopping a few feet away as if he understood that she needed that space between them. My name is Everett Kincaid. I have a ranch about 6 miles north of here, near the base of the mountains. I run cattle and horses, and I do well enough to spare some supplies for someone who needs them. That is all this is. Help from one human being to another. No strings attached. Julianna wanted to believe him, but 8 months of captivity had taught her that kindness always came with a price tag. Still, she was so hungry that her hands were shaking, and the cuts on her wrists burned like fire. She nodded slowly once, and watched as relief flickered across Everett Kincaid's weathered face. He paid for the supplies and carried them outside to where his horse was tied. Julianna followed, her legs moving automatically while her mind tried to work out what game he was playing. But he just packed everything into his saddlebags, then turned to her and held out the bread and some of the dried beef. "Eat," he said simply. "Then we can figure out what comes next." She ate standing up, tearing into the bread with a desperation that would have shamed her if she had any shame left. The food was the best thing she had ever tasted, and she had to force herself to slow down, to not make herself sick. Everett did not watch her. Instead, he busied himself checking his horse's hooves and adjusting the saddle, giving her privacy in the only way he could. When she had finished, he offered her the canteen, and she drank deeply, feeling the water wash away some of the dust that had coated her throat. "Thank you," she said finally, because even after everything, her mother had raised her to have manners. "Where were you headed?" Everett asked, taking the canteen back and capping it. "Nowhere," Julianna admitted. "I was a captive. Mexican bandits took me from a wagon train headed to California last September. I was traded to another group, and then the Apache raided the camp and freed me. They pointed me north and left me. I have been walking for 3 days." Everett was quiet for a long moment, and she could see him processing this information, fitting it into whatever picture he was building of her in his mind. "You have no family waiting for you. No one who will be looking for you. My parents died of cholera 2 years ago. I was traveling with my uncle and his family, but I do not know if they survived the raid on the wagon train. Even if they did, they would have kept moving west. They are probably in California by now if they made it." She said it without emotion, stating facts as if they belonged to someone else's life. "So you have nowhere to go," Everett said slowly. "No money, no prospects, nothing." "That about sums it up," Julianna said, lifting her chin. "But I am a hard worker. I can cook and clean and mend. I can work in someone's home or help in the store. I will find a way to make it on my own." Everett shook his head. "No one in this town is going to hire you," he said bluntly. "They will have all kinds of ideas about what happened to you while you were a captive, and decent folk do not hire women they think have been ruined. That is just the truth of it, harsh as it sounds." Julianna felt something cold settle in her stomach. She had feared as much, but hearing it said out loud made it real. "Then what do you suggest I do?" she asked, and she hated how small her voice sounded. Everett took off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, which was shot through with gray at the temples. He looked to be in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most, but he had the bearing of someone who had lived a hard life. "I have a proposal for you," he said finally, "and I want you to hear me out before you say no." Julianna tensed, preparing herself for whatever indecent proposition was about to come. But what Everett said next caught her completely off guard. "I have a ranch 6 miles from here. It is good land, with water and grazing for cattle and horses. I built the house myself 5 years ago when I got out of the army. It has 3 bedrooms, a good kitchen, and a porch that faces the mountains. It is more space than one man needs, and keeping it up takes time away from the work that actually makes money." He paused, turning his hat over in his hands. "You said you can cook and clean and mend. Those are all things I need help with. What I am proposing is that you come work for me. I will pay you in room and board, plus a small wage that you can save up until you have enough to go wherever you want to go and start over." "Why would you do that?" Julianna asked suspiciously. "You do not know me. I could rob you blind and disappear in the night." "You could," Everett agreed. "But I do not think you will. And as for why, maybe I am just tired of eating my own cooking and wearing shirts with missing buttons. Or maybe I know what it is like to have nothing and nowhere to go, and I remember the people who helped me when I needed it." He met her eyes steadily. "I am offering you honest work for honest pay. What you do with that offer is up to you." Julianna studied him, trying to find the trap hidden in his words, but his face was open, his posture relaxed. He was not standing too close, was not looking at her with that hungry expression she had learned to recognize in men. He just looked tired and sincere, and for the first time since her capture, she felt something inside her chest that might have been trust trying to take root. "I will not share your bed," she said bluntly. "If that is part of what you expect, then you can say so now and save us both time." "That is not part of the arrangement," Everett said firmly. "You will have your own room with a lock on the door. The key will be yours. What happened to you, whatever you went through, that is your business. I am offering you a job, nothing more and nothing less." Julianna took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders. She could refuse and try to make it on her own in this town that had already judged her. She could walk away and keep going north, hoping to find somewhere that would take her in. Or she could accept this stranger's offer and hope that he was telling the truth about his intentions. "All right," she said finally. "I will come work for you, but if you lay one hand on me that I do not welcome, I will gut you with your own kitchen knife. Are we clear?" A smile tugged at the corner of Everett's mouth. "Crystal clear, madam. Now, let us get you cleaned up and out to the ranch before it gets dark. The road is not safe to travel after sunset." He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. Julianna stiffened at the proximity, but Everett kept his hands on the reins and nothing else, giving her as much space as was possible while riding double. They headed north out of town, following a dirt road that wound through grassland dotted with pine trees. The mountains rose ahead of them, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. The ride took about an hour, and Julianna spent most of it trying not to fall asleep in the saddle. Exhaustion pulled at her like an undertow, but she forced herself to stay alert, to notice landmarks and gauge distances. If she needed to run, she wanted to know how to find her way back to town. But when Everett's ranch came into view, some of her tension eased. It was exactly as he had described it, a sturdy log house with a wide porch, a barn and several outbuildings, corrals holding horses and cattle. Everything looked well maintained, prosperous without being showy. It looked like a place where someone could build a life. Everett dismounted first, then reached up to help Julianna down. She ignored his offered hand and slid down on her own, stumbling only slightly when her feet hit the ground. He did not comment on her refusal of help, just gathered his saddlebags and led the horse toward the barn. "Come on inside," he called over his shoulder. "I will show you where you will be staying, and then you can clean up while I see to the animals." The inside of the house was surprisingly clean for a bachelor's dwelling. The main room held a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table with 6 chairs, and a couple of comfortable-looking armchairs. A doorway led to the kitchen, and Julianna could see a hand pump at the sink, which meant indoor plumbing of a sort. 3 doors opened off the main room, leading to what must be the bedrooms. Everett opened the door to the room on the left. "This one is yours," he said. "There is a bed, a dresser, and a washstand. I will bring you hot water in a bit so you can clean those wounds. The door locks from the inside, like I promised. Julianna stepped into the room and was surprised by how comfortable it looked. The bed had a real mattress, not just a corn husk pallet, and the quilt on top was obviously handmade. There was a rag rug on the floor and curtains on the single window. "Who made all this?" she asked, gesturing around the room. "My sister, mostly," Everett said. "She lived here for a while after her husband died, before she remarried and moved to Helena. She left a lot of her things behind, said I should keep them in case I ever got married or had guests. The dress I bought you today might not fit quite right, but there are some of her old dresses in that wardrobe that you are welcome to use." "That is generous of her," Julianna said carefully, "and of you." "It is just practical," Everett said with a shrug. "No point in having things sit unused when someone can get good out of them. Now, I am going to tend the animals and then make some supper. You rest up, and we can talk more over dinner about what your duties will be and how this arrangement is going to work." He left, pulling the door closed behind him. Julianna waited until she heard his footsteps cross the main room and the front door close, then she turned the lock on her bedroom door. The click of the mechanism sliding into place was the most beautiful sound she had heard in months. She sank down onto the bed, and for the first time since her capture, she let herself cry. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet tears that slid down her cheeks and dripped onto her hands, releasing some of the pressure that had been building in her chest for so long. When the tears finally stopped, she felt hollowed out but strangely lighter. She got up and explored the room more thoroughly, opening the wardrobe to find several dresses in reasonably good condition, along with some undergarments and even a nightgown. She had not owned a nightgown in 8 months. The thought made her want to cry again, but she pushed the feeling down. A knock on the door made her jump. "I have hot water for you," Everett called from outside. "I will leave it by the door." "Thank you," Julianna called back, waiting until she heard him walk away before unlocking the door and retrieving the bucket of steaming water. She poured it into the basin on the washstand, then used the soap and cloth she found there to scrub 8 months of dirt and degradation from her skin. The water turned gray, then brown, then nearly black. She washed her hair twice, working her fingers through the tangles until she could run them through smoothly. The cuts on her wrists stung when the water hit them, but she cleaned them thoroughly, knowing that infection was more dangerous than pain. When she was done, she dressed in one of the dresses from the wardrobe, a simple calico in deep blue that fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in the bodice. She braided her wet hair and studied herself in the small mirror hung above the washstand. The woman looking back at her was pale and too thin, with shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and horrors survived. But she was clean, and she was free, and that was more than she had dared to hope for 3 days ago. She emerged from her room to find Everett working in the kitchen, stirring something in a pot on the stove. The smell of beef stew made her stomach clench with hunger all over again, even though she had eaten just a few hours earlier. "Feeling better?" Everett asked without turning around. "Much," Julianna admitted. "Thank you for the water and for the use of your sister's things." "They are your things now for as long as you need them," Everett said. He ladled stew into 2 bowls and carried them to the table, gesturing for her to sit. "I am not much of a cook," he said apologetically. "Mostly I just throw things into a pot and hope they turn out edible, but this is not bad if I do say so myself." They ate in silence for a few minutes, and Julianna had to admit that the stew was actually quite good. Certainly better than anything she would have expected from someone who claimed not to know how to cook. When she had finished her first bowl, Everett refilled it without asking, and she did not protest. So, Everett said when they were both done eating. "I guess we should talk about expectations. I am up before dawn most days, seeing to the animals and checking on the herd. I have hired hands who help with the heavy work, 3 men who live in the bunkhouse out past the barn. They come up to the house for dinner at noon and supper at sunset. Nothing fancy required, just good solid food and plenty of it." He paused, then added, "I should mention that they are decent fellows, but I will make it clear to them that you are an employee same as them, and you are to be treated with respect. If any of them give you trouble, you tell me, and I will deal with it." "I can deal with trouble myself," Julianna said quietly. "I do not doubt that," Everett said, "but you should not have to. This is your home now for as long as you want it to be, and you have a right to feel safe here." The word home hit Julianna harder than she expected. She had not had a home in so long that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to have a place that was hers, a space where she could let her guard down. "What else do you need from me?" she asked, steering the conversation back to practical matters. "Laundry, mending, general housekeeping. Nothing too demanding. I know you need time to recover from whatever you have been through." Everett stood and carried their bowls to the sink. "As for wages, I was thinking $5 a month plus room and board." "That might not sound like much, but you will not have any expenses here, so it will all be money you can save." $5 a month was more than fair for the work he was describing. Most household help made less than that, and they did not get their own room with a lock on the door. "That is very generous," Julianna said carefully. "Are you sure you can afford it?" "I do all right," Everett said with a slight smile. "The ranch turns a profit and I do not spend much on myself. I would rather pay fair wages and sleep with a clear conscience than pinch pennies and wonder if I am taking advantage of someone." Julianna studied him, still trying to understand what motivated him. He was not like any man she had met before. There was a fundamental decency to him that seemed to run bone deep, and she found herself wanting to trust him, even though every instinct she had developed over the past 8 months screamed at her to trust no one. "I will do my best to earn my keep," she said finally. "But I should tell you that I do not know how long I will stay. Once I have saved enough money, I might want to move on to start fresh somewhere that no one knows what happened to me." "That is your right," Everett said. "I am not trying to trap you here. I am just offering you a place to land until you are ready to fly again." He walked back to the table and held out his hand. "Do we have a deal?" Julianna looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment, then reached out and shook it. His grip was firm but not crushing, and he released her hand as soon as the shake was complete. "We have a deal," she said. "Good," Everett said. "Now, you look like you are about to fall over. Why do not you go get some rest? Tomorrow is soon enough to start worrying about work." Julianna did not argue. She bid him good night and retreated to her room, locking the door behind her and changing into the nightgown she had found in the wardrobe. The bed was softer than anything she had slept on in months, and she sank into it with a sigh of relief. She expected to lie awake, listening for danger, but exhaustion dragged her under almost immediately, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she slept without nightmares. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of someone moving around in the kitchen. For a moment, panic seized her and she could not remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back: the walk to Deer Lodge, Everett Kincaid's offer, the room with the lock on the door. She was safe. She was free. She dressed quickly and emerged from her room to find Everett making coffee. "Good morning," he said, looking surprised. "I tried to be quiet so I would not wake you." "I am a light sleeper," Julianna said, which was an understatement. 8 months of captivity had trained her to wake at the slightest sound, always ready to defend herself or flee. "What time is it?" "A little past 6, Everett said. "I have already fed the animals and checked the north pasture. Thought I would come back for breakfast before heading out to mend some fence." "Let me make breakfast," Julianna said. "That is part of my job, is it not, if you are up to it," Everett said. "But do not push yourself. You only just got here." "I am fine," Julianna insisted, moving past him to survey the kitchen. She found eggs, bacon, flour, and buttermilk and set about making a proper breakfast. It felt good to work with her hands, to do something productive and normal. Cooking was familiar, comforting, a reminder of the life she had lived before everything went wrong. Everett watched her for a minute, then went to wash up, leaving her to her work. By the time he returned, she had breakfast on the table: scrambled eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits that were only slightly lopsided. Everett stared at the spread with something like wonder. "I have not had biscuits in 2 years," he said. "Not since my sister left." "Then I hope they are good," Julianna said, taking a seat across from him. They were more than good. They were perfect, fluffy and buttery, and exactly what a biscuit should be. Everett ate 4 of them and looked like he might cry with happiness. "You can stay as long as you want," he announced. "Forever, if that is what it takes to keep eating like this." Julianna felt a smile tug at her lips, the first genuine smile she had managed in months. "I am glad they meet with your approval." After breakfast, Everett headed out to work on the fence, and Julianna set about learning the rhythms of the house. She washed the breakfast dishes, swept the floors, and took inventory of what supplies they had and what they would need from town. The work was soothing, mindless in the best possible way, and for a few hours she could almost pretend that she was just a woman keeping house for her employer. Nothing more complicated than that. The hired hands came up to the house at noon, as Everett had said they would. They were young men, probably in their early 20s, and they looked at Julianna with open curiosity. But Everett had clearly spoken to them, because they were polite and respectful, calling her Miss Owens and thanking her for the meal she had prepared. Over the next few weeks, Julianna settled into a routine. She woke early, made breakfast for Everett and the hired hands, spent the day cleaning and mending and preparing meals, and retreated to her room each evening to read or so. Everett paid her at the end of each week, counting out the money carefully and handing it over with a nod. She saved every penny, tucking it into a tin box she kept hidden under her mattress. But as the days turned into weeks, something unexpected happened. She began to enjoy the work, to take pride in keeping the house running smoothly. And she began to enjoy Everett's company. He was a quiet man, not given to idle chatter, but when he did speak, he said things worth hearing. He told her about his time in the cavalry, about the battles he had seen and the friends he had lost. He told her about buying this land with his discharge pay, about the years of hard work it had taken to build the ranch into something profitable. And slowly, cautiously, Julianna began to tell him her own story. Not all of it; there were things she could not bear to speak aloud, but enough. She told him about her parents, about the cholera epidemic that had swept through their town in Ohio, about the decision to go west with her uncle's family. She told him about the wagon train, about the attack that had scattered them, about the bandits who had taken her. Everett listened without judgment, without pity, and that made it easier to talk. He did not try to tell her that everything would be all right, or that she should put it behind her and move on. He just listened, and when she was done, he thanked her for trusting him with her story. "You are the strongest person I have ever met," he said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. "Most people would have broken under what you went through, but you are still here, still fighting. That takes courage I cannot even imagine." "I do not feel strong," Julianna admitted. "Most days I feel like I am barely holding myself together." That is what strength is, Everett said. Holding yourself together when everything inside you wants to fall apart. Anybody can be strong when things are easy. It is the people who keep going when things are hard that are the truly strong ones. Juliana looked at him, at his weathered face and kind eyes, and felt something shift inside her chest. It was not attraction, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. Trust, maybe, or the possibility of trust. The idea that maybe not all men were like the ones who had hurt her. That maybe some men were like Everett, decent, honorable, good. As summer faded into autumn, the air grew cooler and the leaves on the aspens turned gold. Juliana had been at the ranch for nearly 3 months, and she had saved almost $15. It was enough to buy passage on a stagecoach, enough to start over somewhere new. But when she thought about leaving, she felt a strange reluctance. The ranch had become familiar, comfortable. And Everett had become something more than just her employer. She caught herself watching him sometimes, noticing the way his hands moved when he worked, the way his face softened when he smiled. She noticed how he always made sure she had enough to eat, how he fixed things around the house without being asked, how he treated her with a respect that never wavered. And she noticed how he looked at her sometimes, when he thought she was not paying attention, a look that held warmth and something that might have been longing, but which he always carefully hid when she turned toward him. One October evening, after the hired hands had gone back to the bunkhouse and the dishes were washed and put away, Everett asked if she would like to take a walk with him. It had become a habit, these evening walks, a chance to stretch their legs and talk about the day. But tonight felt different somehow, charged with an energy that made Juliana's heart beat faster. They walked down to the creek that ran through the property, following the worn path through the tall grass. The water was low this time of year, gurgling over smooth stones and reflecting the last light of the day. Everett stopped at a flat rock near the water's edge and gestured for Juliana to sit. She did, and he sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool evening air. "I have been thinking," Everett said after a long silence, "about this arrangement of ours." Juliana's stomach clenched. Was he going to tell her it was not working out? That he needed her to leave? "What about it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "I have been thinking that it is not really fair," Everett continued. "You are working for wages, saving up to leave, and that is fine. That was the deal we made. But the thing is, Juliana, I do not want you to leave." Juliana turned to look at him, her heart hammering in her chest. "What are you saying?" Everett met her eyes, and there was vulnerability in his expression that she had never seen before. "I am saying that over these past few months, you have become more than just an employee to me. You have become a friend. Maybe more than a friend, if I am being honest. And the thought of you leaving, of waking up one day and finding you gone, it makes my chest hurt in a way I cannot quite describe." "Everett," Juliana started, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish," he said. "I am not asking you for anything. I am not trying to pressure you or make you uncomfortable. I just needed you to know how I feel. And I wanted to make you an offer, a different kind of offer than the one I made when we first met." "What kind of offer?" Juliana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This land, this ranch, it is mine, but it is too much for one person," Everett said. "It needs a partner, someone to share the work and the responsibility and the rewards. I'm not talking about you staying on as hired help. I am talking about this being your land too. Your home, not just a place you are staying until you save enough to leave." He took a breath, then added, "I am asking if you would consider staying here permanently, as my partner, as my equal." "Why would you do that?" Juliana asked, her mind reeling. "Why would you give me half of everything you have worked for?" "Because land is just land," Everett said simply. It does not mean anything unless you have someone to share it with. These past months, having you here, it has made this place feel like a real home for the first time since I built it. And I realize that I do not want to go back to living alone, to eating burned stew and wearing shirts with missing buttons and talking to my horse because there is no one else around. He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle. I am not saying you have to give me an answer right now. I am not even saying that this has to be a romantic arrangement if that is not what you want. I am just saying that my land is yours if you will share it with me. However that looks, whatever that means, I am offering it freely. Julianna stared down at their joined hands, her thoughts spinning. She had been so focused on saving money to leave, on starting over somewhere new, that she had not allowed herself to consider the possibility of staying. But now that Everett had said it out loud, she realized that it was what she wanted. She wanted to stay here in this place that had become home. And she wanted to stay with Everett, this good man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect. I do not know if I can be what you need, she said slowly. I am damaged, Everett. What happened to me, it changed me. I do not know if I will ever be able to be with a man the way a wife is supposed to be with a husband. I am not asking you to be anything other than what you are, Everett said firmly. If all you can give me is friendship and partnership, then that is enough. And if someday you feel like you can give me more, then that would be a gift I would cherish. But I am not going to pressure you. I am not going to demand things from you that you are not ready to give. I am just asking if you will stay, and we will figure out the rest as we go. Julianna felt tears prick at her eyes. No one had ever offered her something like this before: unconditional acceptance, patience, partnership. It was more than she had dared to hope for. I want to stay, she said, her voice cracking. I want this to be my home. I want to share it with you. Everett's face broke into a smile that transformed his whole appearance, making him look years younger. Yeah, he asked, as if he could not quite believe what he was hearing. Yeah, Julianna confirmed. And then she was crying and laughing at the same time, and Everett was squeezing her hand gently, carefully, as if she were something precious. They sat by the creek until the stars came out, talking about the future, making plans. Everett would go into town the next week and have papers drawn up that would give Julianna legal ownership of half the ranch. They would tell the hired hands that she was now the co-owner of the property, entitled to the same respect they showed Everett. And they would take things one day at a time, building a life together at whatever pace felt right. That night, as Julianna lay in her bed with the door locked, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt hopeful. The future, which had seemed so dark and uncertain just a few months ago, now stretched out before her full of possibility. She had a home, a partner, and a chance to build something real. It was more than enough. Over the winter months, Julianna and Everett fell into a new rhythm. She was no longer just the housekeeper but the co-owner of the ranch, which meant she had a say in decisions about the herd, about which horses to buy and sell, about how to spend their profits. Everett treated her as a true equal, asking for her opinion and respecting her judgment. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, their relationship began to shift from friendship into something deeper. It started small. Everett began finding excuses to touch her, a hand on her shoulder when he passed behind her chair, a brush of fingers when he handed her something, a steadying grip on her elbow when she stumbled on an icy patch. And Julianna found that she did not mind these touches. In fact, she began to crave them, to lean into them, to seek them out. By Christmas, they had progressed to sitting close together on the porch in the evenings, their shoulders touching, their hands occasionally clasping. Everett moved at a glacial pace, always giving Julianna room to pull back, to say no, to set boundaries. But she did not pull back. Instead, she found herself moving closer, testing the waters of physical affection, learning that not all touch was violent or degrading. One snowy January evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Julianna rested her head on Everett's shoulder. She felt him tense for a moment, then relax, his arm coming up to encircle her shoulders. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just existing together in comfortable silence. When Julianna finally lifted her head to look at him, she found him gazing down at her with an expression so tender that it made her breath catch. "Can I kiss you?" Everett asked, his voice rough with emotion. "You can say no. I will not be upset, I just need to ask." Julianna's heart hammered in her chest. She had not been kissed by anyone since before her capture, and the thought of it made her both nervous and excited. But this was Everett, who had shown her nothing but patience and kindness. If she was going to trust anyone with this, it was him. "Yes," she whispered. "You can kiss me." Everett leaned down slowly, giving her plenty of time to change her mind, and brushed his lips against hers with the lightest touch imaginable. It was barely more than a whisper of contact, but it sent sparks shooting through Julianna's entire body. When he pulled back, she found herself leaning forward, chasing his mouth, and he smiled against her lips before kissing her again. Deeper this time, but still gentle, still careful. When they finally broke apart, Julianna was breathless and trembling, but not with fear. With want, with need, with feelings she had thought were dead inside her. "That was nice," she said, and then laughed at how inadequate the word was. "More than nice. That was wonderful." "We can do that again sometime if you would like," Everett said, his thumb stroking her cheek. "I would like that very much," Julianna said. From that night on, their relationship became openly romantic. They kissed often, long, slow kisses that made Julianna's toes curl and her heart race. Everett continued to move slowly, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, but Julianna found that she wanted more. She wanted to be close to him, to explore this connection that had grown between them. And one night in late February, she told him so. "I want to be with you," she said as they lay together on the couch, her head on his chest, his fingers combing through her hair. "Properly, as your wife." Everett went very still. "Are you sure?" he asked. "There is no rush, Julianna. We can take all the time you need." "I am sure," Julianna said, lifting her head to look at him. "I love you, Everett. I think I have loved you for months now, but I was too scared to admit it. But I am not scared anymore. You have shown me what love is supposed to look like, and I want that. I want you. I want to build a life with you, not just as partners, but as husband and wife." Everett's eyes shone with emotion. "I love you too," he said, his voice thick. "I have loved you since the day you followed me into that general store with your chin up and your eyes full of fire. You are the strongest, bravest, most incredible woman I have ever met, and I would be honored to call you my wife." They were married in early March in a simple ceremony at the small church in Deer Lodge. The hired hands were there, along with a few townspeople who had come to accept Julianna over the months she had been at the ranch. It was not a large or fancy wedding, but it was perfect. Julianna wore a dress that Everett's sister had sent from Helena, a beautiful cream-colored gown with lace at the collar and cuffs. Everett wore his best suit, which he admitted he had only worn twice before, and looked handsome enough to make Julianna's heart skip. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Everett kissed her with such tenderness that Julianna felt tears slide down her cheeks. These were happy tears, though, tears of joy and relief, and gratitude for this second chance at life that she had been given. Their wedding night was spent at the ranch, in the room that had been Everett's but which was now theirs. Everett was patient and gentle, checking in with her constantly, making sure she was comfortable and happy. And when they finally came together, It was nothing like the horrors Julianna had endured during her captivity. It was sweet and loving and healing, a reclaiming of her body and her agency. Afterward, as she lay in Everett's arms, she felt whole in a way she had not felt in over a year. Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers and new grass, and the ranch came alive with activity. Calves were born, colts took their first wobbly steps, and Julianna and Everett worked side by side from dawn until dusk, building their future together. They talked about expanding the herd, about maybe starting a horse breeding program, about all the possibilities that lay ahead of them. In May, Julianna realized that she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of emotions: joy at the thought of having a child with Everett, but also fear that she would not be a good mother, that the trauma she had endured would somehow damage her ability to love and nurture a baby. She waited a few days before telling Everett, working through her feelings, and when she finally did tell him, she also shared her fears. Everett listened, then took her hands in his. "You are going to be an amazing mother," he said firmly. "I have seen how you care for everything on this ranch, how gentle you are with the animals, how patient you are with the hired hands when they make mistakes. That same love and care is going to make you an incredible parent, and you are not going to do this alone. I am going to be right there beside you, every step of the way." His words eased some of her anxiety, and as her pregnancy progressed, Julianna found herself growing excited about the new life growing inside her. Everett was attentive without being smothering, taking on extra work so she could rest, making sure she ate well, reading to her in the evenings from the books they had ordered from a catalog. He talked to her belly, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the mountains and all the adventures they would have together. In December of 1879, Julianna gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and difficult, but Everett stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand and wiping the sweat from her forehead and telling her how strong she was. When the midwife finally placed the baby in her arms, Julianna looked down at his tiny, perfect face and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. "He is beautiful," Everett said, his voice choked with emotion, "just like his mother." They named him Samuel, after Everett's father, and he became the center of their world. Julianna discovered that she loved being a mother, that all her fears about not being able to do it were unfounded. She nursed Samuel and rocked him and sang him lullabies, and Everett was as devoted a father as she had known he would be. He carried Samuel around the ranch in a sling, showing him the horses and cattle, telling him about everything they saw. As Samuel grew from an infant into a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. They expanded the herd and started the horse breeding program they had talked about, and both ventures proved successful. They hired more help and built a larger bunkhouse. Julianna kept the books and managed the household finances, discovering that she had a head for numbers and business. In the summer of 1881, Julianna gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Rose. She had Everett's eyes and Julianna's dark hair, and she was a sunny, happy baby who rarely cried. Samuel adored his little sister and appointed himself her protector, which Everett found endlessly amusing. The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. There were challenges of coarse droughts and harsh winters, cattle that got sick, horses that needed breaking. But Julianna and Everett faced everything together, their partnership growing stronger with each obstacle they overcame. And through it all, their love deepened and matured into something solid and unshakable. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Everett surprised Julianna with a trip to Helena to visit his sister. They left the children with the hired hands, who had become like family over the years, and spent 3 days in the city. They stayed in a real hotel, ate in restaurants, and went to see a play at the theater. It was the first time Juliana had left the ranch since arriving in Montana, and while she enjoyed the change of scenery, she found herself missing home. "I never thought I would be the kind of person who preferred ranch life to city life," she told Everett as they rode the train back to Deer Lodge. "But there is something about the ranch, about our land, that just feels right." "That is because it is your land," Everett said, squeezing her hand. "You built it with your own 2 hands, same as me. It is as much a part of you as you are a part of it." When they returned to the ranch, Samuel and Rose ran out to meet them, and Juliana scooped them both up in a hug, breathing in the familiar smell of sunshine and grass and home. That night, as she and Everett lay in bed with their children asleep in the next room, she reflected on how far she had come since that day she had stumbled into Deer Lodge with nothing but the clothes on her back and wounds on her wrists. "You ever regret it?" she asked Everett. "Taking me in, offering me half of everything you had worked for?" "Not for one single second," Everett said without hesitation. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Juliana, you and the kids. This life we have built together, it is more than I ever dreamed of having." "Me too," Juliana said softly. "When I was a captive, I thought I would never be free again. And even after the Apache freed me, I thought I would never feel safe, never feel whole. But you gave me that. You gave me a home and a family and a life worth living. I will never be able to thank you enough for that." "You do not have to thank me," Everett said, pulling her close. "We saved each other. I was just a lonely cowboy before you came along, going through the motions of living but not really alive. You changed that. You made me whole." They fell asleep in each other's arms, and Juliana dreamed of the future, of watching their children grow up and have families of their own, of growing old with Everett on the land they loved. It was a good dream, the kind of dream she had thought she would never have again. By 1885, Samuel was 6 years old and Rose was 4, and the ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the region. They now ran over 500 head of cattle and had established a reputation for breeding quality horses. Everett had been approached several times about selling the ranch, but he always refused. This was their home, the place they had built together, and no amount of money could tempt them to leave it. Juliana had become an integral part of the community, known for her kindness and her business acumen. She served on the church committee and helped organize the annual harvest festival. The townspeople who had once looked at her with suspicion and judgment now greeted her warmly and sought her advice on everything from child rearing to balancing account books. One afternoon in late summer, as Juliana was hanging laundry on the line, she heard the sound of horses approaching. She turned to see a group of riders coming up the road, and her heart clenched with old fear. But as they drew closer, she recognized the leader as Sheriff Dalton from town, and she relaxed slightly. Everett emerged from the barn and walked over to meet the riders. Juliana followed, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sheriff," Everett said, nodding in greeting, "what brings you all the way out here? Got some news I thought you folks should hear," the sheriff said, dismounting. "We arrested a group of bandits down near the border last week. Mexicans, mostly, but there were a couple of white men with them. Turns out they have been operating in this area for years, raiding wagon trains and ranches, taking captives." He looked at Juliana. "One of them confessed to being part of the group that took you, madam. Said he remembered you because you fought so hard. He is in custody now, along with the others. They will be tried and likely hanged." Juliana felt the blood drain from her face. She had not thought about the bandits in years, had tried to put that whole chapter of her life behind her. But now it was back, dredging up memories she had worked hard to bury. Everett immediately moved to her side, his hand on her back, steadying her. "Is there something you need from my wife?" he asked the sheriff, his voice cold. "Because if not, I would appreciate you getting to the point and then leaving. This is not easy for her to hear." "I just thought she should know," the sheriff said, looking uncomfortable, "in case she wanted to testify at the trial. Your testimony could help make sure these men hang for what they did." Julianna took a deep breath, trying to calm the panic that was rising in her chest. The thought of facing those men again, of having to relive her captivity in a courtroom, made her feel sick. But another part of her wanted justice, wanted to see the men who had hurt her punished for their crimes. "I will do it," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "I will testify, but I want them to hang, Sheriff. I want them to pay for what they did, not just to me but to all the other people they hurt." "We will make sure of it, madam," the sheriff said, tipping his hat. "The trial is in 2 weeks. I will send someone to let you know the exact date and time." After the sheriff and his men left, Everett held Julianna while she shook with suppressed emotion. "You do not have to do this," he said. "No one would blame you if you chose not to testify." "I have to," Julianna said. "I survived what they did to me and I built a good life despite it. But other people were not so lucky. If my testimony can help make sure these men never hurt anyone else, then I have to do it." 2 weeks later, Everett accompanied Julianna to the trial. They left the children with Everett's sister, who had come down from Helena to help, and made the journey to the territorial courthouse. The trial was a grueling experience. Julianna had to recount her capture, her months in captivity, the things that had been done to her. She had to face the men who had hurt her, to look them in the eyes and tell her story. But she did it. She sat in that witness stand with her head held high and her voice steady, and she told the truth. And when the jury came back with a guilty verdict and the judge sentenced the men to hang, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she had not even realized she was carrying. On the ride back to the ranch, Everett held her hand the whole way. "I am so proud of you," he said. "What you did today took more courage than anything I have ever seen." "I had to do it," Julianna said, "for myself and for all the other people they hurt, and now it is over. I can finally close that chapter of my life and move forward." And she did move forward. She threw herself into her life at the ranch with renewed energy, focusing on the present and the future rather than the past. She watched her children grow and thrive, teaching Samuel to read and write, teaching Rose to sew and cook. She worked alongside Everett to make the ranch even more successful, and together they became pillars of the community. In 1887, Julianna gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Thomas. He was a calm, serious baby who seemed to study the world with thoughtful eyes. Samuel and Rose doted on him, and the house was filled with laughter and noise and love. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows. Everett's sister died in childbirth in 1889, leaving behind 2 young daughters. Everett and Julianna took the girls in without hesitation, raising them alongside their own children. The ranch house, which had once seemed too large for one man, was now filled to bursting with family. By 1895, Samuel was 16 and already a skilled rancher. Rose was 14 and showing a talent for training horses. And Thomas was 8 and interested in everything from rocks to books, to the mechanics of how things worked. Everett's nieces, Emma and Clara, were 12 and 10 respectively, and had become so integrated into the family that Julianna often forgot they were not her biological children. One evening in late autumn, as Julianna and Everett sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains, Everett reached over and took her hand. "Do you remember that first night we met?" he asked. "When you told me you would gut me with my own kitchen knife if I laid a hand on you?" Julianna laughed. I remember, I was so scared and angry, I did not trust anyone. And now look at us, Everett said, gesturing to the house behind them where they could hear the children arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to set the table. We built all of this together. A family, a home, a life. It is more than I ever dreamed possible. Me too, Juliana said, leaning her head on his shoulder. You saved my life that day in Deer Lodge, Everett, not just by giving me food and shelter, but by showing me that I could trust again, that I could love again. You gave me back my humanity. We saved each other, Everett said, kissing the top of her head, and I would do it all over again in a heartbeat. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, and Juliana reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been a captive, lost and broken, with nothing to her name. But she had survived, and she had found her way to this good man who had offered her not just his land but his heart. Together, they had built something beautiful and lasting, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. As the years rolled on into the new century, Juliana and Everett watched their children grow into capable, compassionate adults. Samuel took over much of the day-to-day management of the ranch, showing a talent for business that made Juliana proud. Rose married a veterinarian from Helena and moved to the city, but she visited often and always brought her growing family with her. Thomas went to university to study engineering, then came back to the ranch to apply his knowledge to improving their operations. Emma and Clara both married local men and settled in the area, remaining close to the family that had taken them in and loved them as their own. The ranch house saw grandchildren running through it, and then great-grandchildren, each generation adding their own stories to the history of the place. Through it all, Juliana and Everett remained devoted to each other. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their movements slower, but their love never wavering. They still took evening walks down to the creek, still sat on the porch and watched the sunset, still held hands like young lovers. In the spring of 1920, Everett fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, then progressed to a fever and difficulty breathing. The doctor said it was pneumonia, and that at Everett's age, 72, recovery was uncertain. Juliana nursed him devotedly, sitting by his bedside day and night, holding his hand and telling him stories about their life together. On a mild April evening with the window open and the sound of the creek drifting in on the breeze, Everett squeezed Juliana's hand and smiled at her. "I have had a good life," he said, his voice weak but content. "The best life because I got to spend it with you." "Do not talk like that," Juliana said, tears streaming down her face. "You are going to get better. You have to get better." "We both know that is not true," Everett said gently, "and that is all right. I am not afraid. I have lived a full life, loved and been loved, and that is more than most people get." He reached up and cupped her cheek with his hand. "Promise me you will be all right. Promise me you will keep living, keep being the strong, beautiful woman I fell in love with." "I promise," Juliana whispered, though the thought of life without him seemed impossible. Everett passed away peacefully that night, with Juliana holding his hand and all their children gathered around. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe. But true to her promise, Juliana did not let it break her. She grieved deeply and honestly, but she also kept living. She continued to help manage the ranch, to spend time with her children and grandchildren, to be an active part of the community. She lived another 15 years, long enough to see her great-grandchildren grow into young adults, long enough to know that the legacy she and Everett had built together would endure. And when she finally passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1935, at the age of 76, she was laid to rest beside Everett on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstones were simple, just their names and dates, but someone had added an inscription below Julianna's name that captured the essence of their story. She was a captive who found freedom, a wanderer who found home, and a broken heart that learned to love again. The ranch continued to thrive under the care of their descendants, and the story of Julianna and Everett became family legend, passed down through the generations. It was a story about second chances and the healing power of love, about how two broken people had found each other and built something beautiful together. It was a story about a cowboy who saw a homeless woman in need and offered her not just his land but his heart, and about a woman who had the courage to accept that offer and build a new life from the ashes of her old one. And it was a story with a happy ending, the kind of ending that Julianna had not dared to hope for on that hot July day in 1878, when she had stumbled into Deer Lodge with nothing but the clothes on her back and wounds on her wrists. But she had found it anyway, through courage and determination, and the grace of a good man who saw her worth when she could not see it herself. Together they had created a love story for the ages, one that proved that even in the harsh landscape of the Wild West, with all its dangers and hardships, true love could not only survive but flourish. Their story became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that no matter how dark the night, there was always the possibility of dawn.